Alright guys, I'm going to change out this old original ignition switch. This is an original. The key is not, but the switch is an original from 55. It could be 56, I don't remember, but it was just a ignition switch I had in my parts box when I built the car, so I used it. Anyway, I am having an intermittent issue with the starter trying to engage the flex plate real lightly, and if you wiggle the ignition switch a little bit, it'll do it. So this ignition switch is real sloppy, so it's used up, you know what I mean? So I'm going to show you here. I've already popped it loose because it is a little time consuming to try to fiddle with it to get it, especially trying to do it one-handed holding a GoPro. But anyway, to remove an ignition switch from the cylinder, you have to have a paper clip, and there's a hole in the ignition switch right here. Now the worst part is you have to have the key, and a lot of guys when they drag these cars in, they don't have a key. So this has to be in the lock position to be able to use the cotter pin to unlock it. So when you turn it to lock, there's the little hole right there, and with this out of here, you can see that little thing right there, that little ball. So when you put the cotter pin in that hole, that's what you're pushing on, and you can feel it. It's spring loaded. So basically when you push in on it, you just turn it and pull it out of there. So anyway, I've got the lock cylinder out, and at this point now I can take this loose, this nut here, which I got to take off. Now this is going to turn into a mess because this is all spade connections on the back, and I'm changed it out to a universal style switch that has nuts on it. So I've got to change all the spades to ring terminals. But not much fun, but it's got to be done. Okay guys, so if your original ignition switch is in your dash, but you don't have a key for it, that's where it gets kind of tough. So if you're not going to use the switch, which I wouldn't recommend it anyway, the only way to get these out for me is I will take a pair of channel locks, vice grips, whatever, and I will grab hold of that outer piece like that, and I'll just twist it, and all it does is snap off the little, I think there's three, if I remember right, three little bent over tabs underneath, and they're really small. It doesn't take much effort to knock this off, but anyway, it just pops this little cover piece off here. So once this cover piece comes off, you can undo the nut here, this little round nut. Now I have before just unscrewed this, and you can actually it'll get to a point where it stops because that thing's keeping it from popping off there, and you can put a little punch in here or something, flat blade screwdriver or something, stick it up in there and hit it with a dead blow or a rubber mallet or whatever, like you're going to turn it, and it'll eventually knock it off there by unscrewing this nut. But I hate these ignition switches. They're always problematic because they're too old, and even the reproductions, they don't have a good record for being good or lasting very long. So what I normally do, if it's still in the dash and I can't get this apart because I don't have the key, I will just clamp that on there and just twist it and just snap it off, and at that point you can undo the nut and then pull that out the back of the dash. But anyway, it's just how I do it. Other people probably have different ways. Okay, I went ahead and just used channel locks and just turned it. It popped right off there. You hardly have to put any effort on it, but you can barely see a little bitty thing here. Around it, it has these little claw things, and it's snapped on there. It's pressed on there. So give it a nice little twist, and it'll knock this cover off there. Of course, you can't put it back on, but I don't ever reuse them anyway. But anyway, at that point the nut will come off there, and then you can pull the switch out of the back of the dash. Alright, I got the cluster out so I'd have good access to the ignition switch here, because I got to change the terminals out. to ring terminals. So got that going on, and these universal ignition switches, I like these. This is what I usually run. I just used that original one on the car because it was trying to get keep the original look of the dash. But anyway, this is a ignition switch that I usually use when I would rewire a car, but now I get to go back and put it in there, which I should have done in the first place. But this ignition switch, it kind of sucks to put these in a Tri-5 Chevy because the hole in the dash is large. These are real skinny. So when you try to put this in there and tighten it down, it just ends up coming loose, and the whole thing starts turning when you're turning the key on and off and trying to start it and stuff. So it's kind of a pain in the butt. I've done all kinds of different things to try to make them stay in there. And on the 4-door in particular, I modified the dash permanently to where it'll only take these. So, which I'm fine with, because I'll never put an original, you know, style ignition switch in the car, because the new ones don't have that good of a track record. So what I have done is I found a washer that fits over this whole thing and goes down here to this flat part. Now it has two raised flat sides on it right here, one there and one over here. And it had a casting line down the center that was raised, so I took a file and just kind of took that off to where it's nice and flat. Now those flat sides is what's going to keep this thing from turning, but it's going to take a lot of work to do that because my dash is already painted, so I can't do any welding or anything like that. So I just tack welded a piece of strap on one side of this washer, and what I did was I put the washer on this, and then I put that flat piece up to this side right here, and then I traced it out with a fine tip Sharpie so I knew where it went. Then I took everything off and I clamped it with a pair of vice grips, and then I tack welded it. So when this dries, it's not too bad now actually. So what I'm going to do at this point is try to get this, that's hard to do one-handed of course, get this put on here. Golly. Anyway, so that'll go up to the side just like that. Now I've got another piece cut right here, and I'm going to stick it up here up against this one, and I'm going to trace it out, or just clamp the vice grips. I don't have room, I'll have to trace it out. But anyway, I'll put that piece on there, butt it up to it where it's all real tight, trace it out, take it all back off, clamp it with vice grips, and then tack weld it. And at that point I'll have a circle with two flat sides basically. And then at that point I'll have to go in here and probably round this a little bit where it's sharp on the sides right here. Try to take off these corners basically. And then I'm going to place it up in behind the dash and make sure it's going to fit, which I know it will because I've done this before. But I am going to drill a hole in each side of the dash, and I am going to tap this. I'm going to stick it up in there to its center, and then I'm going to mark it with a Sharpie where I drilled the hole in the dash. Use that to mark this. Then I'm going to drill and tap these two plates, or pieces of strap that I welded on there, for these. Now these are stainless steel. These are actually for a wing window assembly for a hardtop. They have a real super tiny countersink head on them. So I will drill and tap this, and then the dash itself, the hole, I will countersink it with a countersink bit. It just needs a little bit. And then this will pretty much go on there pretty much flat. But this will screw permanently to the dash. I mean, it can be removed and an original be put in there, but I'll never do it. You know what I mean? So I'll drill and tap this, and I'll have a drilled hole in each side of the dash. But the beauty of it is when I put the bezel on the dash that says lock, you know, off, on, start, and all that, you won't see these screw holes ever because they'll be behind that little bezel indicator, whatever you want to call it. But I like these ignition switches. The simple fact is they're just about at any parts store you can find locally,
and online. These are like 15 to 20 bucks. They take ring terminals. It comes with nuts. But anyway, you can use ring terminals, and unlike a factory one that takes a spade, you know, you're limited on stacking up your ignition ones to run other stuff. So you'd have to run like a junction block or something. But with these, you can just stack up the ring terminals, which makes it really kind of nice. And to me, they're a little bit more stable than having a spade. So just me, you can do it however you want, but pretty much all of the Tri-5 Chevys that I've wired up of my own and the customers' cars, I use these ignition switches. At O'Reilly's, this part number is CS7, Cat Sam 7, and it comes with keys. It has a knurled little nut on the outside of it. But anyway, this is a stainless little cover on this, which I will polish on the polishing wheel on the buffer. And then the aluminum knurled nut, it actually looks kind of nice. I will polish it on the polishing wheel as well. But I'm still going to use the factory indicator, but it should look pretty good when it's done. It's just going to take a lot of work to do it, you know what I mean? That's why I've been putting this off, because I knew it was going to take a while. Okay, so I got the 2 pieces of flat strap, and I've just got them tacked right now onto that big washer. But it sets down flat on it, and now with these being on those flat sides, this will not turn. So I was planning on rounding these corners and stuff, which I don't even need to now because the part of the dash is really big, so I don't even need to do that. So what I ended up doing was I set it up in here, kind of tried to eyeball it in the middle a little bit the best I could. And I took a silver Sharpie and I put a dot on each side of the dash, and then I put a whole bunch of masking tape around it. Yeah, so in case the drill slipped, it wouldn't tear up my paint. But anyway, I drilled 2 holes in the dash there. Now those are completely hidden with the bezel that goes on there. The little bezel like this goes on there, and they're completely hidden behind that. So you're not going to see those at all. So what I've got is 2 of these Phillips screws, and they're actually from a wing window assembly. They're reproduction, but they're for a wing window assembly on a hardtop. They're an 832 thread, but they have a very tiny head on them, countersink with a completely flat top on them. So I drilled the hole out accordingly, and then I used a countersink bit on the end of my drill, and I countersunk those. So now when the screws go in there, the head is completely flush with the dash. So they're completely flat with the dash. So anyway, I marked the spot on these, which you can barely see it. I need to get a new little fine tip Sharpie, but I can still see them. But I basically drew out the circles for those holes I drilled. So now what I'll do is I will drill and tap these 2 holes in this to 832. So at this point, when I put this ignition switch behind there, I can use those 2 screws and actually screw this to the dash. So this will no longer spin when I'm trying to start the car, turn it on, whatever. And then I can put the bezel back on and all that stuff to work. So there's probably other ways you can do it, and like I said, I've wired a lot of cars and used this same ignition switch, and I've tried many things. I've even tried a modified large star washer in behind there, and over time, you know, trying to start the car and turn it off and all that, it just eventually works loose. So you need to kind of try to find something to make that not turn. So that is what I'm going to do to this car. And again, you don't see those holes in the dash once the bezel goes on there. So I am completely good with this, because this will be the type of ignition switch I will always use in the car and all the other cars that I'm going to wire. So, you know, unless it's a G-body or a C10 or something that has a factory switch on the column, I'll do that. But these cars with these external ignition switches, I like these universal style ones. But should work just fine. Now on my wife's 4-door, let me show you that. So this is a dash of my wife's 55 Chevy 4-door. And I kind of did about the same thing to her dash, other than this is permanently welded into the dash, so I didn't drill any holes or anything like that. Because this car, you know, is in bare metal and it's in bodywork stage. So anyway, I welded a washer into it, and then put the strap pieces going down for the flat sides, and the ignition switch in there fits in there kind of firm, and then when you put the bezel on, it kind of hides everything. So here's a problem that will come up when you're trying to use your factory Bel Air ignition switch bezel stuff here. You know, the hole's pretty large there, and this is your knurled nut that you get for the ignition switch. It screws on. This is what's out on the face side. These look really nice when they're sanded and polished. This is aluminum, so I'll sand and polish this. But anyway, this barely is big enough to fit on the outside of that. Now, you could just screw that on there, but if you can see that, there is a space around that, which probably not many people's going to notice. Now, what I had done in the beginning when I was first starting mock-up on this car, I mocked it up. I was actually going to use one of these ignition switches, and then, like I said earlier, I just changed my mind to go with the stock, and it ended up biting me in the rear. But I had found a washer that had the correct outside diameter to fit down inside that factory plastic bezel. And this was just a silver CAD plated steel washer from probably Lowe's or something. But when I had my dash parts chromed, I had them chrome that washer as well. Now, I did have to modify the inside of it with a die grinder to open it up a little bit to fit that. So this is what I'm going to use on there, because it fits down in that and fits kind of flush, and then this nut will go on top of that. But if you do not want to mess with the washer and getting it chromed and all that, you could try to find the correct outside diameter washer in stainless steel, and that way you could sand and polish it and it'll look chrome. But you probably will have to modify the inside of it, you know, open it up a little bit. But if you're going to go with just the knurled nut on the bezel like that, you don't like that void in there, you can use a large O-ring and just slip it over it. And it goes down over that knurled nut and fits down in there pretty nice. And you really don't even notice there's an O-ring on there. It just kind of blacks it out because it has a black, you know, insert in it anyway. But this is the O-ring that I'm using. Looks like it's 1 1/4 by 1 by 1/8. There's a part number for you if you wanted to. These are all over, like my local Ace Hardware, these are everywhere. So, I mean, you can go bigger, you can go smaller, you can do whatever you want. This is just the route I'm going to go. But I'm going to use the chrome washer because I've already got it here. Now, you could take a regular steel washer, you know, that fits down in the bezel, and you could just paint it gloss black with spray paint or whatever, because the black will blend into the black insert. So that would be the cheapest, you know, easiest alternative there. But anyway, I'm going to use the chrome washer because I had it done for this anyway. All right, ignition switch is installed. It is tightened down and it is pretty much done. Now, to, you know, anybody that doesn't know Tri-5 Chevy ignition switches, it kind of looks stock, especially with the, you know, Bel Air bezel around it, indicator, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's pretty awesome. That thing is much more reliable, a lot more affordable for me. So that is done deal. So when it is turned on, it's in line even with the on the indicator. And then when it goes to start, it's in line with the start. So I think that's pretty awesome. Now, this ignition switch in particular, like the original, you turn it and it locks it. You can't get the key out because it doesn't really lock. It's really just accessory is what it is, but if you just want your accessory on. But anyway, that's it installed. I think that's pretty cool. That's one more thing checked off the list, and a lot less headache now of something that I have to worry about, you know, failing. I will tell you, I might have mentioned it in one of the other video clips, I know of people from the forum. I've got two buddies that I know of that's used a reproduction ignition switches and they had trouble with them. So to me, I don't have any faith in them. You know, you put in a new ignition switch in your car and you drive to a cruise night, or you go somewhere and then you go to start your car and your switch doesn't work and you can't start your car to leave, you know what I mean? It's just, to me, not worth the hassle. So the price difference, that ignition switch is like 15 bucks. It's probably cheaper than that on Amazon, I don't know. But anyway, I'm happy with it. And if you don't know these cars, you're not gonna know that's not stock. You know what I mean? I like the knurled nut on there. It looks really nice with the chrome washer. It looks stock, especially with the indicator. But it is installed, it's done, I'm happy. So thanks for watching.
Here's an overview of the switch. This is the part number, BWD, Borg Warner. It's a CS7. There are cheaper ones that are not Borg Warner, but it is the same switch. I actually got on eBay and typed in CS7 switch, and some of them come up, and it was actually 15 bucks, and that's the one that I put in the hardtop. This Borg Warner, actually, I bought for the 4-door, so I'm going to show you here what you can do to kind of make it work. You do have to build something to make it stay in the dash. Now, if you don't mind tightening it up every once in a while, because they do work loose, because the hole is so big on this compared to the big hole in the dash, you know, you can use like a big star washer behind it and then put it through the dash and then tighten your little aluminum nut down on there, and you know, eventually the switch just comes loose. I know this from personal experience, so you have to keep tightening it up. So I always try to modify the dash or build a bracket to where it screws to the dash to where it doesn't come loose, because you don't want that switch, you know, being loose all the time when you're trying to start the car and the switch is turning inside the dash, because it's going to be pull on the wires. So I think these are an awesome advantage over the original, simply because they have nuts on the back instead of spade connectors. So you can double stack or triple stack, you know, battery wire or ignition wires. You can't really do that with the spade connectors on the original style switches. But what I can tell you from the differences between the half price one of this, because these are average, I think, around 30 bucks for a Borg Warner, and the cheaper one, which is the exact same switch, just with a different box and a name, is the Borg Warner actually is machined right here on the flat part. These switches have two flat sides on them right here, and that's what I try to build a bracket to hold, is you know, pressure against these two flat sides. The cheaper one had this casting line running right down it on both sides. So there's a casting line on that flat spot. So I took a little file and went in there and just filed it flat. It didn't take much because it's just, you know, cast. But anyway, these switches to me are the best way to go, especially for a street rod style switch. Now, if you're going to use it in a 55 or 6 Chevy, this is a Bel Air indicator for the dash, and when you try to put that on there, there's a big spot there. So what you can do, because you can see the little dropped indent in this is the nut that's knurled that goes on there, and all I've done is stuck an O-ring on that, and it fits down in there and it takes that void out, and nobody is really going to notice that, you know what I mean, the black O-ring on there. So, and that doesn't turn. Once you tighten this nut down, it doesn't turn anymore. So, you know, I don't think anybody's going to notice that. Now, the 150 and 210s have a clear indicator, so I don't have any experience with that. I've just always done the Bel Air indicators that have a black insert with a chrome bezel. The 150 210 just has a plastic clear indicator without this, so you'd be able to see behind that. You could probably still use the black O-ring and it'd probably be fine, but all I did was slip that over that. But that is the nut right there. Now you can polish this up because it's just dull aluminum, and then this little cover right here, this is stainless steel, and it's usually kind of dull, and I just hit it on the buffing wheel and it brings a shine to it. But I think that's just a decent little way of, you know, slicking it up a little bit. But you know, if you don't want a lot of this protruding out of the end of it, it does have a set nut hidden here for depth that comes with it that you can screw on there for that. But anyway, it'll come with 2 keys. Not a sponsor, I had to, you know, buy it, but that's just an overview of the switch. And on the back it tells everything: accessory, ignition, battery, and then the one in the middle is start. So that's your solenoid wire on the top middle right here.